Hi, I'm Frank Chua. Welcome back to my channel. I'm standing right now on the edges of Mansfield Borough, right, on a kind of overcast winter day, right? And today's video is basically on the topic of covered bridges, right? Some of you may be aware that covered bridges are basically a kind of a quaint vernacular architecture that you find in the northeast, right, around the northeast area, which also includes Pennsylvania. And American covered bridges are perhaps the most popular kind of covered bridges that is recognizable around the world. But like many things American, they originate from Europe, right, from Europe itself. So although America has come to represent covered bridges, these quaint local architecture that has always come to represent kind of a distant past, a romantic past of America during a much more laid back time when America was less industrialized. But the reality is that most American covered bridges are probably less than 200 years old, right? 200 years old itself, right? And you really actually have much older ones in Europe, and even older ones in China, right? Older ones in China itself. So today what we're gonna do is that we're gonna visit the closest covered bridge to Tioga County, or to where I live, basically in Tioga County itself. Now, this is a significant covered bridge because it was built in the 1800s. It's called Buttonwood Covered Bridge. It's about a 50-minute drive from here, and it is basically registered with the National Register of Historic Places in this country. So it's quite a significant covered bridge itself, right? So before we go there, I'd just like to add that is there a covered bridge in Singapore? Yes, there is one. Right, but we'll come to that later on itself, right? But there's some commonality itself between covered bridges in this country, also in China, and also the only one that exists in Singapore today. All right, but we'll come to that topic later on as we talk about the phenomenon of the appeal of covered bridges to the locals around the region itself. So what we're going to do now is basically take a drive to Buttonwood and actually visit the site itself. I've never been there, and this will be my first time checking out the covered bridge at Buttonwood. Alright, we're gonna exit 215 South, or Super Corridor 99 South, out of Mansfield Borough, and we'll be heading towards Buttonwood Village. Lycoming County is bigger than Tioga County, slightly bigger. Tioga County is about 3 times the size of Singapore, right? anybody owns a car around, or it is their own personal kind of transport. Right, you see the Buttonwood exit here. Buttonwood is just 4 miles from here, so we're quite close to it. We're quite close to it, just probably another couple of minutes. Oh, I just passed the covered bridge. I could see it on the left side, so we're heading towards Buttonwood English Center, and this is where we'll get off and turn around to head towards the covered bridge. Right, so yeah, I just saw the covered bridge itself on the left. Right, so we're gonna just exit the highway and go back towards the covered bridge, or at least towards the village of Buttonwood. Alright, we get out here. We should be there pretty soon, probably in less than a minute. Less than a minute, we should be there. So that was just Buttonwood, a small little village that we just passed by. Alright, it should be somewhere here because I believe the covered bridge is... Yep, it's Covered Bridge Road. Yep. Yep. This is called Covered Bridge Road. Of rural Pennsylvania is basically like that. Farmhouses, countryside, right? Small farms. They're not big commercial farms. They're basically small farms, and a lot of them are just farm buildings. There we have the covered bridges right in front of us. There you have it. Alright, I'll see if I can park here. Now this is not exactly the most picturesque covered bridge or the idyllic covered bridge area that we often associate with covered bridges, As you can see, it's actually next to a lumber mill. So it's a very pretty heavily used covered bridge. Most covered bridge are barely used these days, but this one is used, right? It's used, and it has basically a height clearance of 8 feet 3 inches, right? So alright, you can see why I say that this covered bridge itself is not exactly the most picturesque, because it's next to a lumber mill. Right, you can see a lumber mill behind me, right, but that's where the covered bridge is. Alright, right, let's look inside it. Right, let's look at the covered bridge itself. Alright, I believe this covered bridge was built sometime in the late 1800s, right, in the late 1800s itself. This is one of the 3 existing covered bridges in Lycoming County. Now, I read the statistics about it, and the figures around it. It's about 72 feet long, on the shorter side, right? But very much, as you can look at the timber itself, right? And you can see the truss itself inside. The truss itself, I believe it's a kind of a combination of king post and queen post truss. These are basically triangles that basically help to support the bridge, the bridge. Alright, so it's very much unlike quite a number of rustic countryside bridges which are no longer in use. This one is still very much in use. Right, so basically, as long as you meet the parameters of the bridge itself, as you can see from here, right, vehicles can use it. It's 8 feet 3 inches in height. 8 feet 3 inches in height. All right, so all right, why were covered bridges basically built the way they do? Right now, although there's a folklore that they are called kissing bridges, where you get a guy basically gets a chance to kiss a girl while the carriage goes under the bridge itself. That's basically just a folklore itself, right? The reason for the shelter roof or the covered bridge itself, as you can see, right, there's a practical reason for that, right? One thing, a sheltered bridge or a covered bridge basically helps the bridge to withstand the elements. That's what it does, right? It lasts longer. A bridge lasts longer, especially when it's made of timber, right? It lasts longer by about anywhere to 10, 15, 20 years more if it's a sheltered or a covered bridge. Now, the other reason is that when you put a roof on top and you put siding at the side itself, well, like this, okay, it actually helps to, in the old days when there were still carriages, horse-drawn carriages and all that, it basically prevents the horses from looking at the running waters, right? So the horses are typically more calm if the sides of the bridge are covered. So if there's rushing water below, the horse will not panic, and they are more likely to calmly walk across the bridge itself. Okay, now there's actually yep, there's a kind of a sign here that says that this property, this covered bridge, has been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. I believe this was actually, yeah, you can see it was built in 1898, right? 1898. So it's a historical site. It is a historical site. Well, today is a winter day, although it's pretty warm by winter standards. It's in the mid-30s, and much of the snow has melted. But if it's, this place is more picturesque, right? If you have a snow winter landscape itself, okay? Alright, I just asked the lady behind that's walking her dog and the stroller with the baby. I asked her more about this covered bridge, but she just moved in this area, so she doesn't really know that much, right? So anyway, you can see the covered bridge behind me, right? And so basically, now, just to give you an overall view of covered bridges in this country, I believe there's less than 1,000 left in the country today, and Pennsylvania itself perhaps has among the most, right? Covered bridges are scattered all throughout United States, right? But most of them are in the Northeast, and Pennsylvania has a lot of them, largely because Pennsylvania has a lot of rivers, right? Has a lot of rivers. I believe in the 1960s there were still about 4,000 covered bridges left in this country, right? Today there's less than 1,000, and I believe even if Pennsylvania doesn't have the most covered bridges, it probably is one of the top 3, right? Largely because of the number of rivers itself. All right. Now, just to give you an idea of when the first covered bridge itself was built, the first covered bridge itself that was built in this country is called the Permanent Bridge at Schuylkill River, just outside Philadelphia. That was a very impressive covered bridge. That's actually made of concrete piers or stone piers itself. It was white and it was very big. It was very big itself, right? It was built in 1805. Right? That was the very first covered bridge itself. Now, so this is sort of a classic covered bridge itself, although I believe it's on the small side, and this one is pretty heavily used, at least relatively quite heavily used because most covered bridges are in pretty much the countryside today, right? And they are only used for foot traffic, but this one still allows vehicular traffic to pass it. Okay, all right, so all right, I'm gonna end here and then we'll continue more with covered bridges, the significance of covered bridges, or the appeal of covered bridges in this country, and also a little bit about covered bridges, or what they call corridor bridges in China, and then finally we'll talk about the only covered bridge in Singapore. Now let's look at this phenomenon of why covered bridges are still popular in American folk art, what I would often refer to as Americana art. And often covered bridges itself, the subject itself often comes along with old barns, old mills, right? Vernacular architecture that you normally associate with an earlier antebellum America. Now, if you look at the early rise of industrial America, some of America's earliest factories were located at near rivers, where the river power was being used through the spinning mills, right, to drive the looms, water power looms itself. So this becomes the basis of the very first American factories, right, especially the one at Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Now, when you have a mill, and often the mills themselves, there's a covered bridge nearby. After all, there's a river around, and whenever these early factories rise up and there are signs of economic activity, right? This was a proud time for early America because it means that your village or your town is prospering, right? In fact, in places such as Waltham, Massachusetts, or Lowell itself, especially in Lowell, Massachusetts, we have the very bold experiment of women being hired for the first time, right, to work in American factories, right, in these mills themselves. So you can see that wherever there's mills, there's covered bridges, right, it means that your town is prospering, right? Your town itself is prospering. So you can see why these vernacular architecture, mills, barns, covered bridges are popular subjects for American folk art, right? But that's just a kind of a pragmatic way of looking at it. The economic positives of these early American rural scenes, right? But the real reason why covered bridges and a lot of these early American vernacular architecture, such as early barns, mills, as well as covered bridges, are popular subjects, is simply because they remind America of an earlier time, a less stressful, a more idyllic time where the pace of life is much slower, right? Now, obviously, this is a romanticized version, right? But this also explains why, if some of you are familiar with a very well-known contemporary artist, right, Thomas Kincaid, who just passed away not too long ago, right? He's often remembered as the painter of light, but his subject matters are very popular, right? And his paintings still sell today. Now, they are really no different from scenes of early covered bridges or early rural America farms, right? Because it basically appeals to an American audience yearning for a less stressful past, right? A less stressful past. So it is romanticized, it's very idealized, but in many ways it is a criticism of the hectic life of today, right? The stressful modernization and pace of a post-industrialized world. All right, I should also add that if you look at some examples today, right, well, this is really no different from why on PBS, right, series such as All Creatures Great and Small are very popular with an American audience. It's just an English version of a kinder and gentler nation of a not too distant past. So you can see why, even though All Creatures are Great and Small is about the life of a country vet, but it's really about a lifestyle that is slower pace, and people appear to be kinder and gentler during that time itself. So really, it's basically the same phenomenon why shows like these appeals to an American audience, not just to an English audience, but also to an American audience. Now, interesting enough, there's also been a resurgence of interest in Chinese covered bridges, right? Now, some of these Chinese covered bridges predated as long as the early 1100s, and they are a lot bigger, right? They're a lot bigger. They're often called what you call corridor bridges or rain and wind bridges because they provided shelter from rain and wind, or simply at times they are often more romantically called rainbow bridges because some of these covered bridges, they arc like a rainbow, right? Now, again, they have very practical use because these Chinese covered bridges, right, are much bigger, much wider. So often they are used like a common ground for village folks to gather. They're often used as also marketplaces. They're also used for festival occasions, and often shrines are built at the entrances of the covered bridges themselves, right? Now, why is it there's been a resurgence or interest in these Chinese covered bridges, right? This is largely due to the fact that as modern China now begin to expand its technology in the steel bridges, right? The steel beam bridges and all that, there's a increased awareness and appreciation for Chinese bridge building heritage. And so in the same way that Americans revered the past for the early basic technology of covered bridges or mills or barns themselves, right? The Chinese now appreciate some of the earlier technologies that of these covered bridges, or what I often call the rainbow bridges, right? As examples of early Chinese technology. Okay. And now let's talk about the only covered bridge in Singapore, right? You couldn't get a more contrasting example than the only one that exists in Singapore, right? Now, this covered bridge, what the Singaporeans often refer to as a overhead sheltered bridge, is part of a larger group of overhead pedestrian bridges, right? Walkways for pedestrians, right? But lately there has been an appreciation for these earlier overhead pedestrian bridges, right? And there's only one that is covered in Singapore, right? And it's basically the one that is at Lorong Chuan in the estate of Ang Mo Kio, what Singaporeans often refer to as overhead sheltered bridge. And overhead sheltered bridge, what obviously we call here covered bridges, right? Now this overhead sheltered bridge or covered bridge itself is pretty long, and it goes over traffic, urban traffic or suburban traffic, where I believe there's a 4-lane highway going both ways, right? 4-lane highway. So it's a pedestrian overhead bridge. It's made of sheet metal, right? In fact, it looks like a series of containers that has been put together, right? But lately, as some of these early pedestrian bridges, right, is disappearing in Singapore, right? So this overhead sheltered bridge at Lorong Chuan Ang Mo Kio is still the earliest existing overhead bridge, right? It just happens to be a sheltered overhead bridge. I think it's been around since the early 1970s, right? So it is the oldest pedestrian bridge in Singapore in existence today. Now, why do some locals seem to revere them? Again, in Singapore's short history, because this was built in the 70s, right? Most Singaporeans or locals who happen to appreciate them more is because it's a reminder of their youth, or a time when they were kids, of a time when they were still going to school, right? So in a collective sense, right, appreciation for these this only overhead sheltered bridge or covered bridge in Singapore is a kind of reverence or a collective memory for lost youth, lost innocence, and a lost past.